Significant work is done on this, but I think our understanding of data needs to also change, because there's a data that has been used to train this model, but there's a data that we consistently generate by the usage of these tools that helps us improve. And especially in enterprises and businesses, when you're looking to scale these solutions, this will become a very, very important thing for you to consider in terms of how your data sits. Because remember, data owns a lot of insights on you. So who owns your data? If you remember in my first episode when I was shouting out my colleague Mike and saying how his data can be a mine, the data has value that can then be used. Remember that process I told you of moving from point A to point B? The data the motorcycle generates in its usage can be very important for you to tell you this is a path. Based on how we've seen this motorcycle use, there's a shorter path that can help you get from point A to point B. You see, but you'll not have been able to know that if you had not looked at the data. So there's a lot of insights and there's a lot of regulation around it. I know the EU is coming up with regulation in terms of anytime you're running it within their country, how's data going to be used. This company in the US has an entire significant framework as to how they handle data, and reading about them really inspired me to think around how I should structure my organization and enterprise and where the future is trying to go. So it will be very important for us to be able to at least look into it. And then there's the models, and I've touched upon it. So right now when you're looking at models, this model is like a general purpose model. It's been trained on the entire corpus of everything, and it's supposed to be a generalist, that it understands enough about it. And then further on, you're going to talk about something called context engineering and self-hosting models and how you train open source models to work on your area. Remember that thing I was talking about, tuning models? How you can take an open source model and train it on your specific use case. And it's increasingly becoming very important in this day and age. And as a funny side note, this is my 4th recording of this podcast. The first 3 times I explained a lot about what I was working on, and we ended up losing those footages and majority of the things, but I just remember that as a fact because I remember going into details explaining models in one of those earlier takes, and it became very important. But nonetheless, let me come back to models. So the process of how you tune a model. You remember I saying you can't go and ask a model, how do you create a bomb? That's the only example that came to me. There are certain things that you need to embed in your model as safeguards so that as you deploy it, it captures certain essence around culture, what is acceptable or not. You've had these cases of ChatGPT being used as a therapist for you. So when it's speaking to you, I remember there was a case somewhere that GPT was telling someone, you go ahead and commit suicide, etc. How do you govern the outputs that a model can give the user so that you align it to certain cultures, rules, traditions, certain safeguards, your understanding of what right and wrong is? And this is where the model culture becomes very important. And the conversation around open and closed source model, because you can have, there's in the US, the bigger markets are ChatGPT, Claude. These are the 2 most known. If you go to Europe, I think it's Mistral. It's a French company that has done a model like that. If you go to China, majority of them are open source models. There's Kimi K2, there's Quen, and many others. These are the 2 most commonly known. And each of these models have their way of being able to embed certain cultures. If you go to either one of these and ask them about the Tiananmen Square situation in China, they will not answer for you. If you don't know about that, read into it in terms of the age of information and how the Chinese government puts certain controls to be able to impose its sovereignty and what it feels is right in terms of how a country should be governed. All those nuances are captured at the model layer. And even at the model layer, there are these guys, I've forgotten their name in Kenya, they take open source models and then try adjust them to learn about local languages. Msingi AI. Shout out to them. You should look at them. They've done a lot of work on taking open source models and curating them for local languages. And there's a lot of work that's being done here in terms of just look at where Google, and again, I told you, look at where money is going, look at the projects Google is funding, the kind of data collection, open source projects that they are supporting. It will almost guide you to look at how these big foreign organizations are actually considering data in this new day and age. That's why if you look at the EU, I don't think there's a region that has very stringent data rules outside, like let's say North Korea, for instance, other than the EU. And it's for a particular reason. And how you design these models is important because they preserve the essence of a country. And I think this is his name, Ahmad Mustak, does the internet, I think is what it's called. He has a paper that is written to be able to explain for him how he sees the evolution of AI and the concept of sovereignty for him in terms of this model architecture. And for him, his argument is that sometimes when compute is a very big constraint, energy, compute, etc. chips is a very, so the tokens, which are like the fuel that is used to be able to run these models, is a very limited resource. So there's only so much compute you can allocate to certain problems. And his argument is that countries should be able to take compute and channel them towards certain projects that are aligned to their essence as a country. Because right now, majority of the things we've seen with OpenAI, etc., are pushing the capitalistic structure and economic value, in essence. But for him, he was saying, you can challenge this compute and be able to solve problems such as cancer. But again, the reality of the world we live in is that there needs to be economics that drive this. But he made a very interesting argument around it. And you can look into it. But this should show you again on the model layer, because remember, this stack that I drew here, where was this stack? I've explained a lot of things. This stack here, for me, is quintessential for what it means to have sovereignty. Because these are the key big layers that drive this AI revolution. So when I talk about sovereignty within AI, it's mostly governed from that framework. And then lastly is on the application layer. And this, I think, is where most of us have managed to interact with AI. This is where ChatGPT specifically and its usage of the application, where you're coming and having a chat interface, putting something here and getting an output, or being able to run agents, or using Lovable to develop websites. But I'll give you a hack. Long are the days where you had to go to someone and ask them to pay you an amount of money to develop a website. That does it, Claude does it, Manus does it. I think there are many others that I might have forgotten. And you're seeing people being able to create movies out of AI. You're seeing deepfakes out of AI, and I think many other things around it. That's been the introduction to most of us on the application layer, where you're using it to write emails, do certain things that aid you in the movement from point A to point B. And I think the application layer is very important because it's a quintessential catching frame of, mnajuaje nilifundishwa quintessential, but anyways, moving from point A to point B. Are my jokes dry? Anyways, we'll get to see it. The movement from point A to point B is mostly going to be captured by the application layer, if you understand that. But then, these other layers that I've talked about are almost what it takes to build a motorcycle. Circling back to the analogy that I had. All those other stacks are equally important. The application layer is you finding problems in the movement from point A to point B and building applications on it predicated around the infrastructure here that we've built. And that's what I have managed to explain. So that when I talk about AI, I wanted a deeper appreciation for that AI has deeper layers around it that actually drive the economics of this. And not that the application layer is not important. It is important, but the idea around it is we need to be able to work around all these things. And now I'm realizing I had been told it's very important that I almost try put this like this. Let's see if that works. Around application, as I was earlier mentioning, is that the application is the thing that helps us move from point A to point B. That as a work ecosystem is very important because a lot of economic value is actually captured on this end. And that's why you get to see people doing all those amazing things with AI tools. And that becomes very important. So if I can then bring back this discussion back home to all of us. Realistically speaking, when I talk about sovereignty, for me it's an art. It's not a one size fits all for every organization. So here's how I'll explain it. On the application layer, we've managed to be able to see how value can be derived by the use of a motorcycle to move from point A to point B. I think that is granted. The challenge that I am currently seeing at this moment is that as Africa, we need to be very grounded on our reality. And what do I mean by this? The importance of this architecture, the stack that I managed to explain, the structure, should not be escaped on us. And the question that we should be almost battling with from where we are sitting is that we need to be very honest about what we can do, what we cannot do, and what we can work on in the coming years and is within our control to handle on the sovereignty stack. And what it is that we cannot control, what are the safeguards that we need to put on the table to ensure that as we are designing for this next future, we are doing so in a manner that is mindful to all these new dynamics around it. So for instance, when it comes to the data layer, personally, where I think is we account for around 18 to 20% of the youth in the world as a continent. This youth is going to run into this new world. And that for me is an easy market. Secondly, what has been mostly known to be our curse is now our biggest advantage on the data layer. Majority of the data that we own at a continent level has not yet been digitized. And that becomes a very important element that we have to consider as a continent. That the reason why 4% of the data on these models has only been only 4% of the data that has been used to train these models has come from Africa is because majority of our data has not actually been digitized.